Remember, next week Andy Cameron presenting his Saturday Club live from the Mercat Shopping Centre in Kirkcaldy, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. And the address to write to, as usual, for writing to Andy or taking part in the show, is Andy Cameron's Saturday Club, BBC Radio Scotland, P.O. Box 370, Glasgow, G12 8XY, and you can find that address on today's page of the Radio Times. This is BBC Radio Scotland, now the time signal for 11 o'clock.
Radio Scotland News with Michael Murray. Police in France say that now 49 people were killed when two trains collided south of Paris. Up to 80 others were injured, 10 seriously. A number of Britons are reported to be in hospital, but it's not known yet how badly they were hurt. The accident happened when a passenger train travelling from Paris to the Spanish border left the track and smashed into an oncoming mail train. The driver of the passenger train has been detained by police. He's said to have admitted going too fast. A telephone number is being given for anyone who may be concerned about friends or relatives. It's 010 3354 270028. 010 3354 270028. Police in South Africa say at least 29 people have been killed in 3 days of disturbances in mixed-race suburbs near Cape Town. The situation now is reported calm. Meanwhile, the three Common Market foreign ministers who are visiting South Africa have had a meeting with the Foreign Minister, Mr. Pick Botha. They're said to have been frank exchange of views. The new military rulers in Nigeria say they've freed a British businessman who's been held without trial for the past 11 months. Mr. Graham Coviduck from Hampshire is one of more than 100 detainees released since last week's coup, but there's no word on the fate of two Scottish helicopter engineers who are still being held. The police inspector shot dead in Northern Ireland this morning has been named. He was Patrick Martin Vance, who was 33 years old and had 3 sons, aged 14, 11 and 6. He was ambushed by 2 men outside his home in County Down and died instantly after being hit in the head and neck. The TUC Printing Industries Committee is to meet in Blackpool tonight to consider Mr. Robert Maxwell's decision to stop publishing Mirror Group newspapers in central London. The move follows a dispute between Mr. Maxwell and the NGA Print Union. The General Secretary of the NGA says the breakdown in negotiations between the union and Mr. Maxwell was totally unnecessary. The dispute was sparked off last week after Mr. Maxwell said he wanted to print The Sporting Life outside Fleet Street. A court in the Philippines has handed down a stiff sentence to a 40-year-old woman convicted of embezzling about £2,500 from a government insurance agency. She was sentenced to 6 years in jail on each of 138 charges, making a total sentence of 828 years. Travel news now. Major road repairs are being done this weekend on the M8 motorway through Glasgow. As a result, there'll be various lane closures on both carriageways between Junction 10, Westerhouse, and Junction 11, Steps. In addition, the westbound carriageway of the M8 will be reduced to just 1 lane at Junction 13. That's the Proven Viaduct. Finally, Scotland's weather: cloudy with rain in all areas and the rain heavy at times, temperatures near normal. That's the news. Now there'll be more news at 12 o'clock.
You're listening to BBC Radio Scotland, broadcasting on medium wave and FM VHF. It's 3 minutes past 11, and that's time to call David Scott. Three 6161. Call David Scott. Good morning.
Well, we're back after our summer break, and unless you've been abroad, your holiday weather will have been lousy. Needless to say, it was raining as usual when I left my home to come to the studio this morning. It really has been the most miserable summer I can remember. Everyone's been talking about the weather. I don't know if we can talk it out of our system, but we're going to try this morning. With me is weatherman Michael Fish and Dr. John Harrison of Stirling University's Department of Environmental Science. Well, have you any way of forecasting the weather? If so, let's hear from you. How has the rain affected you? Please let me know. And if you've a soggy story or a sunny tale or a comment or a question, call me on 041 338 6161. Good morning and welcome to the programme. Well, it's nice to be back after our 6-week break, if only to have something to do on a wet, miserable Saturday morning. While we've been off the air, there have been one or two subjects that we would have tackled. The BBC itself was in the news over a couple of little local difficulties. The Russians and their spy dust was a cracking espionage story, and the South African situation has blown up again, and we may return to that in future weeks. Then there were the huge increases in salaries for so-called top people, increases larger than many of us earn in a year. However, those were just some of the topics in our absence. One thing that's been constant throughout the summer has been the weather, and it's been awful. It's been said that many parts of the country are suffering their worst summer since 1950, but some of my older friends are claiming this is the worst summer ever. Irrespective of whether it's a record-breaking summer, the weather is having effects on industry, on agriculture, on the economy, and as far as holidays are concerned, it's been pretty much wiped out this year. And it's a recognised fact that constant bad weather can cause depressions, not only climatic, but mental ones too. This affects people's output at work, their ability to tackle problems. More people are off work complaining of feeling ill, when perhaps it's really a physical disgust with having grey cloud above you all the time and so little sunshine. And it's been said by scientists that even domestic pets are affected. Well, personally speaking, I'm praying for a few weeks of sunshine. It really has been a miserable summer. With me this morning is a man known to most of you, Michael Fish, who's been delivering much of the bad news on our television screens in the evenings. Also with me is Dr. John Harrison of Stirling University's Department of Environmental Science, who says Scotland's weather isn't so bad, really. I'm sure you'll want to ask him how he arrives at that conclusion. Well, if you have a question about the weather, about the forecasts, and how the men compile these forecasts, or questions about how the weather affects us in any way at all, give me a call. Or perhaps you've got a happy rain story. That'll make a change, I must say. In any event, give me a call on 041 338 6161, and if you don't have time to note it, can I tell you it's on page 25 of this week's Radio Times. And just to repeat the number, 041, if you're calling from outside Glasgow, 338 6161. That's 338 6161. Good morning, Mike Fish in London.
Hello to you, David.
Mike, you must get many comments from your friends and people you bump into about all the bad forecasts that you've been giving us in recent months.
Well, I'm in hiding at the moment. Actually, I think the British public are wonderful in a way, because they do accept that the weather in this country can be bad on occasions. They also accept that we can make mistakes in our forecasts on occasions, and I think they take it all in good heart.
Oh, I think just to cheer you up at the start of the programme, there was a recent survey, was there not, that said that most people were happy with the forecast you provided for us.
That's right. The Which Magazine Consumers Association did a survey, and they very nicely gave us an 88% success rate, I think it was.
I wish you'd been wrong this summer, some of the time. Can we get something out of the way first of all, Mike? Why has the weather been so consistently bad?
Well, would you like me to say right from the start that, believe it or not, looking at statistics, it hasn't been bad. I know people say you can tell all sorts of things from statistics, there's lies, damn lies and statistics and all that, but I've actually...
I have a feeling that some of your statistics are going to be damn lies.
That's right, but actually, believe it or not, the summer only finished today as far as we're concerned. We look on the summer months as June, July and August, and of course it's going to be next week before we can really get down to adding all the figures up and actually coming to a definite conclusion. But at the moment, believe it or not, for Scotland it only looks as if it's been the wettest summer since 1980, so that's only 4 or 5 years. I think the thing about this summer, at least as far as London's concerned, I'm not so sure about Scotland, isn't the amount of rain, it's the number of occasions it's actually rained. We had rain down here in London for about 25 days on the trot, I suppose, and unfortunately a lot of the rain fell during the daytime instead of overnight, so it was noticed and of course upset people's holiday plans. But in actual fact, the rainfall In Scotland, for instance, it's only 115% of average, so it isn't all that much above average, and the sunshine is around about average, and temperature a degree or so below. So when you just look at figures and not the impression of what you get walking around the street, you get a very different picture.
Yeah, I must say, we were sitting in the office earlier, and from the beginning of July, we calculated there'd only been about 7 reasonable days in Scotland.
Yes, well, this is the thing, isn't it, with statistics? They don't tell the whole story, and we're looking at a 3-monthly period, and we have had a pretty awful August. July, of course, wasn't so bad, you see, and it sort of they cancelled each other out in a way.
So what's causing this then, Mike?
Well, a lot of it's just luck, or rather bad luck. We have been permanently in the sort of track of depressions that have been coming across the Atlantic normally, or well, not necessarily normally, but more frequently at this time of the year. The depressions, that's the areas of low pressure that bring the cloud and rain, take a track fairly well north across the Atlantic, a bit north of Scotland, and more in fact around Iceland and up towards the north of Scandinavia. But this year they've been following a more southerly track, so instead of passing to the north of us, they've been moving in actually across the British Isles and keeping us in a run of westerly winds, and they're not too warm this time of year, and they've been bringing, of course, these belts of rain across from time to time.
Tell me about the Indian summer that some people seem to be forecasting that we might be getting for.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see. That expression is usually used more for October than September. It originates not from the Indian continent as such, but from the Red Indians in North America, and it was a spell of weather that they recognised. I think it was more sort of in the latter part of October rather than earlier on, so we just have to wait and see, but certainly no sign of any fine weather in the next few days.
The records show, as I'm told, that the records which were begun 300 years ago might show that no single month has ever had rain on every day. Yeah?
Yeah, that was true for central London, and that record still stands because we have, believe it or not, had some dry days down here in London recently. Well, if you've been watching the Test match, you'll realise that we had a touch of summer the last couple of days, temperature up to about 80. And virtually unbroken sunshine, so we still haven't had a month when it's rained every day.
Yeah. I've been quite envious when I've been watching the television.
Yes, well, a couple of days ago, of course, there was some really very great contrasts. We had, as I say, a temperature down here in London around about 80, and most of the south of the country was well into the 70s, and then you went through a distinct line, a front line across the middle of the country, and to the north of that, Scotland included, the temperature was way down in the 50s.
Grand. Well, I'd like to speak to Dr. John Harrison in Stirling, but let me, before we do that, we've got Ian Leeper on from Stranraer in southern Scotland. Good morning, Ian. Hello, Ian. Well, we had Ian Leeper on the line. Let me see if we can get Dr. Harrison in Stirling. Dr. Harrison, good morning. Well, we seem to be having some technical difficulties in our first programme back. Mike, if I could come back to you.
I think the water's got in your telephone lines up there.
It's certainly got in something. Yeah. Mike, can I come back to you? The satellites that we see, the photographs on television, I'm just wondering how, because it has been said that it's really difficult to forecast any further than 6 days, 5 or 6 days ahead. How helpful are satellites, or do you still rely on ships and other things?
We still rely on everything. Satellites are marvellous. We couldn't do without them. Two things have happened in the last 20 or 30 years that have absolutely been wonderful as far as weather forecasting is concerned. One is the satellite, and the other is the computer. And they are both absolutely invaluable, and by having both those new pieces of equipment, then the accuracy of the forecast has improved enormously. A computer has made the sort of 3 or 4 day forecast just about as accurate as the 2-day forecast used to be a few years ago. And of course satellites, well, I mean, today is a prime example. In the United States, they wouldn't have been able to give people so much advance warning of Hurricane Elena and evacuate everybody had they not had it on the satellite and been tracking it the last few days. So, I mean, the saving in life more than pays for that satellite.
What about predictions when we get the long-term weather forecasts? I mean, how accurate are those, or are they pretty much guesses?
Well, we don't actually do any long-term forecasting as such. The most the Meteorological Office issues at the moment is an outlook for about 4 or 5 days. We do that on subscription. We also give an indication once a week on the television on the farming forecast at lunchtime on Sunday. But apart from that, we normally just stick to shorter term forecasting, and we leave seasonal forecasting and things like that to the enthusiastic amateurs.
Well, apart from being the man who gives us the news about the forecast, Mike, I mean, where do you go your holidays, and what do you do if you get it wrong, and this sort of thing?
What do you mean, what do we do if we get it wrong?
Well, you occasionally do, don't you?
This is the trouble, isn't it? You're as bad as everybody else. People will only ever remember the 12 or 15% forecasts that are wrong, and never remember and praise us for the 75, 80% or whatever it is, 90% that are right.
Not at all, not at all. I'm sure everyone loves it when you say it's going to be another sunny day tomorrow and there's no sign of cloud.
I'm not going to say that, I'm afraid. No way tomorrow.
Yeah.
Windy and showery.
So how do you predict, or do you, where you're going to go, say, for your summer holidays?
Well, I use my pocket more than anything. I go where it's cheapest. Unfortunately, I have one or two acquaintances scattered around the continent who are only too pleased to hide the fish family for the summer vacation. So we have some quite nice places we can visit in the centre of France and the south of France and Germany and places like that. I like to get away from the British people, and in a way the British climate.
What about the weather now? I mean, can we sort of see any change at all, or are people who still have summer holidays to come going to be best advised to shoot off to some sunspot?
Well, again, I'd have to restrict myself to the 4 or 5 days I mentioned a while ago, and in the next few days, certainly no reasonable weather to be found anywhere in the British Isles, really. I mean, it's not going to be all gloom and doom. There will be some fine spells, but basically we're back in the changeable weather again, or I'm saying I'm including London, of course, because we've had some lovely days recently, and there will be rain around just about everywhere into and up to the middle of the week. Of course, it's not been far away, the fine weather. Last week you only had to go across the channel to get hot sunny weather, and really most of Europe is now and will continue to enjoy hot sunny weather.
I think that Ian Leeper, had we been able to get a hold of him, Mike, was going to ask you if the bad weather may have been caused by the planet's alignment with the sun, which
No.
seems a rather far-out question.
Oh, I mean, we're getting all sorts of things are being blamed for it. In today's paper, somebody was blaming Halley's, or was it Halley's Comet?
Yeah.
Other people have been blaming the introduction of Celsius. All sorts of things. I'm not a climatologist, so I'm not 100% sure of the reasons. Maybe Dr. John Harrison can answer that one. I have a feeling that it's...
I'd be delighted if he could. Let's just try again. Hello, John Harrison.
Hello, yes.
Good morning to you.
Good morning, eventually.
Yes, it's okay getting a line down to London, but through to Stirling proved a bit difficult. John, I'm very grateful you can join us. Can I just remind the listeners that you're from the Stirling University's Department of Environmental Science. Perhaps you could spell out to us just what that is.
Environmental science. At the simplest level, it's the scientific study of the environment. It's, I suppose at its simplest, the application of physics, chemistry, biology to the problems which we face in the natural environment.
Now, you accuse the press, I see, of all too frequently referring to snow and floods and wind, and perhaps giving a false impression of the weather we have here in Scotland.
Do I really? Well, I think that's probably an interpretation of what I've said in the past. What I feel is that we're quite justified in complaining about the weather. Quite justified, especially this summer. But when you think about what else happens in the world, in, for example, the Gulf of Mexico at the moment, then perhaps we do cry a little bit too much about the weather.
I was just speaking to Michael Fish and asking him about the possibility of some improvement. Does that come within your sphere? Do you think that things...
It comes within the sphere of guesswork, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Well, that's... But Michael Fish is saying he doesn't get into the guesswork area. The Indian summer prediction for this year, John Harrison, do you think that it's a possibility, or is it just wishful thinking?
I'd like to think that going on the sort of previous wet summers that we've had, that September's going to be fairly good, but that's a sort of statistical rather than a meteorological prediction, and I think perhaps there's a large element of wishful thinking in there, and I've probably just lost all the free pints I could have had at the pub in the village.
What about weather forecasting as an art? How do you view that?
I think perhaps, like many other people who are not actual forecasters, I'm not a forecaster myself, that it's perhaps over-technical. I think perhaps a greater degree of interpretation, local knowledge might not go amiss. There's always this feeling that outside the meteorological office, people outside the meteorological office feel that the forecasts are sort of machine-made and slightly modified by man.
Well, I think to a certain extent, Mike Fish, they are machine-made because you've got trouble with your computer that you've got to dash off shortly and so on, you know?
It's a man-machine mix. John's quite right there that the forecasts are very much machine-made these days. We couldn't do without it, and as I said earlier in the programme, the accuracy, thanks to the computer, has increased enormously in the last few years. I suppose it's a bit impersonal, really, but we still have a human being there keeping an eye on it, and until they teach the computer to talk, which I suppose isn't far off, I'm still in a job.
Mike, I know you've got to dash off shortly, but now we've got
Yes,
a
I'll give you
technical...
about 5 minutes or so, I think. But as you say, I have a problem with the computer here. I've got my sledgehammer ready. I'm going to give it a good kick.
Well, now we've got everything sorted out, and I say that with my fingers crossed. Let me invite on the line from Shetland, Margaret Sutherland. Good morning, Margaret.
Good morning.
Yes, hello, how are you?
I was just to say that at the beginning of the programme you said, you know, that Scotland had the worst weather and that unless you went abroad you didn't get fine weather. Well, that's not true in Shetland. We have had absolutely a super summer. Apart from big midges, yes, but that's it. We've had very, very good weather.
That's the problem, of course, that when you sit here in Glasgow and you've had a dreadful summer, and it's the same, isn't it? Our Scottish hackles rise when someone in London says the weather in Britain's been dreadful, when in fact it's been nice up here.
Yes, it's great to watch the television and see somewhere flooded, I mean that nicely, to see somewhere in the south flooded out, and we're actually sitting out having summer and our children are out in shorts and t-shirts.
Michael Fish, that must be one of the difficulties for you when you're talking in fairly sweeping terms, isn't it?
Oh yes, it is, and we do appreciate Shetland. We've got a lot of our colleagues work in Shetland, actually, 2 or 3 Met Offices there, so we do know what's going on. And that's true from the statistics. The northern part of Scotland hasn't been all that rainy. The wettest part of the country actually has been down here in the southeast. East Anglia has ended up with about 190% of average, whereas the north of Scotland around about 115, 120%.
John Harrison, midges are a climatic hazard that we'll just have to live with. I mean, whenever we get a good day, they do seem to be out in the multitudes, don't they?
Yes, they're creatures just like us. They like certain weather conditions, and when the weather conditions are right, out they come in their hordes. And unfortunately, they like to be about when we are. And that's regrettable, but that's a fact of life, especially here in Scotland.
Yeah, they are the most annoying thing, are they not, Margaret Sutherland?
As an incomer to Shetland, we all thought that it was, you know, peat bogs, and that they were coming from there, but no, apparently not. You know, they're over the better part of the land in Shetland as well, so it's just the size of them.
Well, if the weather stays up, we must come up and see you in Shetland shortly.
Right, that's very kind.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Annie Laurie from Glasgow is on the telephone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Annie.
Now, it's about this terrible rain. Is it not, you know how they sometimes put atmospherics up into the air? Is it not affecting the kind of pattern of the weather? I've noticed one time when you used to put off these kind of testing things that went up into the atmosphere, it brought terrible bad weather and rain. Is it not something to do with that?
John Harrison, pollution, industrial pollution, does that cause heavy rainfall?
It's a possibility. It's not been scientifically proved as far as I know. This is a familiar comment, observation that people make, that it may be something to do with heavy atmospheric pollution. It could also be due to things like volcanic dust or the end product of nuclear atmospheric explosions. But what we know is that all we know is that they produce large quantities of dust, and that dust, certain grain sizes of dust, can encourage the formation of rain. But I think the wet summer we've been having here can be explained more in terms of the balance between polar and tropical air, and the direction in which depressions have been approaching the British Isles.
Would you like to explain that in layman's terms for us, John?
Well, normally in the summer, we have a depression track. Depressions are what bring rain. They're the weather feature, I suppose you might call them. The normal depression track in summer is towards the north of the country. They skirt across the north of Britain, which allows the high pressure from the Azores to push in every now and then from the southwest. What's been happening this year is that there's been a lot of polar air, cold polar air, pushing well down into the Atlantic. And where that polar air meets the tropical air is where our depressions are formed. And they spin along the edge of that polar air, and they've actually this year been coming at us from the southwest, from the Celtic Sea up through Britain. And whenever they come at us from that direction, they always bring one heck of a lot of rain.
Michael Fish, I know you've got to dash off
Yep.
shortly. From what you've seen of the facts and figures before your machine broke down, what does the weather forecast look like in the next couple of days or so?
Well, can I just come back on that pollution note? Because, again, I'm not so sure there's anything in it, quite honestly. I have to quote statistics, and we've been keeping temperature records since 1659, so that's getting over 300 years, and there have been 103 colder summers since then, so we haven't had pollution all the time since 1659, and there have been well over 60 summers far wetter since we started rainfall records in 1727. So again, we haven't had pollution all the way back to 1727, so it looks a bit unlikely, quite honestly.
Okay, Mike, I know you've got...
You just wanted the forecast, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
For Scotland today, basically, I think some pretty wet and windy weather, giving way eventually to some, in the south, some brighter conditions with some showers. And tomorrow, a fairly cool, breezy day, some sunshine and showers. And would you believe tomorrow night, there might even be a touch of ground frost?
I could believe anything. It really has been most depressing up here. Mike, we'll join you about 9:45 again,
Yes.
once you've got your machine sorted out.
Try and come back to me. I shall be doing sort of talking to you with one hand or one ear and trying to bash the computer with the other. So we'll see how it goes. But I'll be back with you if I can.
Thanks for joining us. That's Mike Fish in London, who's off to sort out his computer so the rest of Britain can be given their weather forecast later. On the line now is Chris Timmins. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, good morning.
Chris, you're the Vice Chairman of the ABTA, the Scottish Tour Operators, and Manager of Global in Scotland. Tell me, this weather, Chris, I mean, it really has been pretty dreadful. I understand that more and more people are booking up to get away abroad as fast as they can.
It is. I think that mainly due to the weather that the tour operators will finish up with one of the best years ever. It's just a pity that because of a poor looking season in the early season, we consolidated a lot of flights and wiped them out, wiped a lot of seats off the market. But even allowing for that, we did put on extra flights during the high season, and everything has gone out full.
Is it Spain and Bulgaria and places like that round the Med?
It's Spain, Portugal and Italy, and Malta, the Algarve. Really, any place where there's a flight from Glasgow is doing booming business.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that people are actually cancelling holidays they've booked in Britain or in Scotland somewhere to go abroad rather than stay here?
Well, I don't know if they've maybe cancelled their UK holiday, because a lot of the UK holidays are left maybe until 2 or 3 weeks beforehand also, except for maybe, say, the Glasgow Fair period. What we have experienced is clients down in even England going into the local travel agent and trying to get a flight out of either Glasgow, and when that's not been possible, out of the nearest airport to their holiday resort in England. Our Manchester office was amazed at the number of sort of Scottish voices that they had on asking if there was anything out that weekend just for a week. And this is really them taking advantage of the second week of their holiday, just wanting to get away to the sun.
Tell me, is there not a danger of overbooking with all those sudden flood of last-minute bookings?
Yeah, well, there shouldn't be, in that most of the operators are now on computer, and unless you start fiddling around with your computer, it should only give you the sales as to what it's been loaded with long before the sort of the sort of bad weather come along.
Well, if you were going away just now, Chris, where would you be off to?
I couldn't get any because we've sold everything. There's nothing really until around about the 21st of September, and there's more and more people actually having to get down south to sort of Manchester and London to try and get away.
I'll be in touch, Chris, for something in January. I think it's most depressing. Thanks for joining me this
Thank
morning.
you, bye-bye.
Bye. Good morning to William Watt in Aberdeen.
Good morning, David.
Yes, William.
Yes. I just wondered if it was possible to predict an Indian summer through watching badgers, or if this is just an old wives' tale.
Well, I don't know. Let's ask John Harrison. Can you predict an Indian summer by watching badgers?
Never having watched badgers, I'm not quite sure that I can help. But what I would say is, going back to a point I was making earlier when I first came on, is that there are local signs in the weather which really you can't feed into a machine. This is the point I was making.
What sort of local signs? I mean, we hear, I was saying just last weekend, we passed a round tree that was loaded with berries, and you know the old prediction about it being a bad winter. Is that sort of thing fairly accurate?
I don't feel that probably what a plant looks like is going to tell you very much about what's going to come. I think that bushes loaded with berries tell you something about the previous winter and spring, when the berries were forming, when the flowers were on the trees. But movements of animals and birds is quite helpful. I don't use it myself, but the people I talk to, the local people here, are quite accurate sometimes with their forecasts over the next week or two.
And what sort of things do they rely on then?
Well, for example, you can tell quite a lot about the state of the ground and how the ground is changing by the movement of moles, how many molehills there are, things like that. Behaviour of badgers, I've never heard of before, but I'm certain that's probably in the same mould.
Well, let's ask William Watt. Mr. Watt, do you observe badgers, and can you predict anything from that?
No, I didn't actually watch any badgers, but I watched a programme about weather prediction through watching badgers, and apparently if they collect their nests when the weather's wet in summer, this creates a compost, and when the warmer weather arrives in an Indian summer, they already have their compost-type nests to keep them warm through the winter. And a man who watched badgers regularly said that this was definitely a way of predicting an Indian summer.
Yeah.
Yes.
John Harrison, would you go along with that?
Yes, I without wishing to sound sort of what's the word? I'm not quite sure what the word I want is, but yes, I would go along with it in that there is an element of scientific validity in it, you know.
Okay, Joseph Deary is on the line from Glasgow. Good morning, Mr. Deary. Hello.
I read an awful lot about it.
Hello, Mr. Deary.
Yes.
Good morning. Yes.
We used to read a lot about research, military people researching into the control of weather and the use of weather. They thought that if two countries had a war, you see, they could bombard each other with snow and blizzard and hailstones instead of weapons, you see. Although that was a wee bit job there. But what I was thinking was, they mentioned the Azores earlier on, this high pressure air systems and such things. You think they'd make more use of the weather instead of complaining about it all the time?
In what way?
Do some research into, high pressure air systems. Now, I'm quite sure they could generate electricity or something from high pressure air systems.
Was that a possibility, John Harrison?
Ooh,
Ooh, indeed.
yes, there are all sorts of things we can do with the weather. If I can go right the way through that.
Yeah.
Controlling the weather as a weapon is a quite serious possibility, and there have been various international conventions on this, and there are a number of people quite worried about the possibility of weather control, because the energy in some of the weather systems is as high as, if not higher, several orders of magnitude higher than the sort of energy systems that we can create, and the principal one being the nuclear weapon. And there was a lot of...
Could you explain the implications of that then, John? I mean, this is something I've never heard of before.
It's not rain-making to drown your enemy or creating snow and all that stuff. What we're talking about is using, for example, Elena, that hurricane at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know how to seed clouds. Okay, we can seed them in a very limited way using certain chemicals. Now, when you seed a cloud, you change the energy pattern within it. Now, without wishing to sound too complicated, all that does is change its direction. If you can alter the energy distribution in a system, you can change its direction of movement. Now, it might be possible, and there have been experiments done, as far as I know, to alter the direction of typhoons, hurricanes, the same thing. You can perhaps make them tip a little to the west, a little to the right. And that might very well be used, and there was quite a serious discussion in the late 1970s about the implications of that sort of thing.
Could, apart from, you suggested earlier, warfare purposes, surely it must have some other industrial possibilities?
Oh yes, there are all sorts of positive things we can get out of weather control, which was the second part really of your the question. But unfortunately, I think there's something in the human makeup which makes something equally bad out of everything we can make something good out of, pardon my English. So obviously, if we can control a weather system like that, we can use it to divert it away from sensitive areas. On a smaller scale, we can use the weather to generate electricity.
I mean, basically, sorry for butting in there, but I mean, could you direct, say, rain to Ethiopia?
Very unlikely. Very, very unlikely. At the moment, the rain seeding experiments that have been carried out have been very, very localized. The problem in Ethiopia is that you really haven't got the water in the atmosphere to throw down onto the surface. That's really a problem of the greater atmospheric circulation, which we're not able to deal with. I mean, the energy being exchanged in the global atmosphere is massive. We couldn't begin to touch that, I shouldn't think.
Mr. Deary, that raised several interesting points there.
Yes.
So thanks for joining us then.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. On the line is now Gordon Henry. Good morning, Mr. Henry.
Good morning.
You're the Director of Aberdeen Tourism Board and the Director of Development and Tourism up there.
Yes,
Have you been particularly badly hit this year?
No, we haven't, in fact. The cities that throughout Scotland, Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Inverness, Dundee, are not really badly affected because there's so much going on in these places. You know, events and festivals which keep people occupied. There are plenty of indoor things to see. In fact, it would be true to say that there's been more pressure on these indoor facilities. Places like Glenfiddich Visitor Centre and Baxter's of Fochabers, art galleries, maritime museums, even our own tourist information centres have been inundated with people looking for things to do in the wet weather.
So basically you're saying that the tourist spots in Scotland shouldn't really have been affected if they have good facilities?
That's right, although this is not true in the rural areas. I think that most people come to Scotland by car. They come over the border and it's raining in the borders. They'll make it as far as Edinburgh because they've got to go to Edinburgh. Then they might make it as far as Perth or at Lochray. And if it's still raining there, they'll tend to turn and go back down south again.
There must be a few areas in Scotland, though, who are wishing now that they'd perhaps invested more money in this sort of thing some years ago.
Yeah, so undoubtedly, I think it's true to say that the places with good facilities that have been well marketed have as good, if not better, a season than before. And that also those who have just provided accommodation or a restaurant or bar facility and waited around for people to beat a path to their door, they've had a very bad season.
Yeah. I've been chided by Margaret Sutherland from Shetland, who phoned in earlier, saying while I'm sitting down here in Glasgow complaining about the weather, they've had a pretty good time in Shetland. Overall, what's been your impression of this summer?
Well, I think that it's been pretty poor, really, as far as the weather's concerned. But it must be remember that many of the people who come to Scotland don't expect to get good weather.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I was talking to some Australians and Californians last Sunday evening at an event at the university, and they were saying the last thing they wanted was sunshine.
Why is that?
They can get every day of life back home. And they come to meet the people, and they look up at families and see the castles and the history and the beauty of Scotland.
I think we must go and visit them and get some sunshine shortly. Thanks for joining me in the programme. On the line now from Stirling is Willie Moore. Good morning, Willie.
Good morning.
Good morning. You're a farmer out there at Castle
Yeah.
Stirling, I understand.
Yes,
Is the agricultural industry being badly hit?
oh yes, I think if any industry has, I think the farmers have been badly hit. With the haymaking, to begin with the haymaking, they're only about 1/3 of the hay crop has been made yet.
Mm-hmm.
2/3 still in the fields. And we're just thinking now it's almost going to be impossible to make the hay.
Why is that? The rain?
Well, with the rain, that's right. The machines can hardly move now on the ground in spite of the mechanisation. We're just totally helpless.
And what effect will that have overall? I mean, are we talking about shortages in the months to come?
Oh yes, I think it'll reach everyone as time goes on. Now we take the potato crop. They've had their problems too. Early in the year they had the blight warnings, and now the potato crop is sitting in water.
Mm-hmm.
Now we come on to the dairy farmer, and his milk has dropped tremendously, just with the cold, wet days and no feeding in the grass.
Are the cows affected by the cold?
Badly. They just like their comforts, just like ourselves. They like a good warm bed, and this is what they're not getting.
And the milk yield is therefore higher?
It's dropped tremendously.
I say in the circumstances that you were describing, where it was warm and comfortable, the yield will be higher.
Our comforts are all right, but for the animals it's pretty bad.
Mm. So, I mean, you were talking about potatoes, you've been talking about wheat and the dairy farmers.
Yes, the grain crops. Now, harvest has begun now, and the grain is coming in off the combine, about 28% moisture. Now, that has to be dried back to 15%. Now, that takes a bit of drying. That's going to cost quite a bit of money for the poor farmers.
Well, I'm sure it's been put to you before, and I make no apologies for putting it just to you again. We always seem to hear of farmers complaining all the time, whether it's too hot or too dry or too wet as it has been this year.
I bet they've got something to complain about this year. I think we've never known for the hay crop to fail to get it off the field, and this is the first time. Now, I just stay quite near Dr. Harrison here, and he's at Stirling University. Now, well, actually, it sounded as if the weather hasn't been too bad for him. Now, he only needs to take his car and motor a few miles around, and he'll see all the crops lying flat in the fields.
Dr. Harrison, suggestion that perhaps you've been having a better summer where you've been than Willie Moore just up the road.
Oh no! I come from an agricultural town down in England, and I'm having exactly the same weather as Mr. Moore, and I've seen the fields and they're a disaster. I sympathise with him absolutely, totally, and it was just interesting to hear Michael Fish say that we've had 103 of these and 60 of the others, and so forth and so on. And actually, if I look through the statistics here in Stirling, if you look at the coldness and wetness, you're only going back to the 1970s in statistical terms. And yet if you talk to local people like Mr. Moore and people living in Bridge of Allen, which is where I live, older people in their sort of 50s, 60s, 70s who lived here all their lives, they cannot remember summers as bad as this. So where's the gap between what people are experiencing and the statistics which people like myself and Michael Fish refer to?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to, at the university, are you not shortly going to be setting up a service, or just beginning to set up a service where people can phone in for specific information about the weather?
Yeah, so it's what we call a site-specific service. The Meteorological Office provide a regional and national forecasting service. What we aim to do here is to help people with particular site problems. Now that might be a frosty site or a windy site or a warm site or whatever. We would come along and assess that particular site. for local weather aberrations.
So if someone wanted, for argument's sake, to grow mushrooms or roses or whatever, and you would advise them on the site whether it was a particularly good site or a bad site, and whether they might do well or otherwise.
All they would have to do is to feed me the information. My particular crop needs particular conditions. It won't tolerate this condition. What are my chances of success? And we could probably come up with an answer.
I mean, what sort of advice would you have been able to give Willie Moore, the farmer who was on a second or two complaining that they've only got a third of their grain crop in? I mean, there must be eventualities that you can't foresee.
We can't foresee things like this, and I think any farming system like the one we have in Scotland or anywhere in Britain just unfortunately has to weather these absolutely awful years every now and then. Perhaps 1984 was perhaps good. It maybe was bad because there was a shortage of moisture. 1985 has been cold and wet and the crops have failed. I mean, if you're really going to be extreme in the advice you were going to give, you'd say, well, give up now and go to the south of France. But people have been farming these lands for years and years and years, and unfortunately it's just one of those things you have to live with.
John, I was talking earlier about perhaps humans being affected, and Willie Moore was talking about how cows, for example, are affected with this dreich weather that we're having.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how badly are humans affected? We hear cases of depression or cases that are supposed to have been caused by the bad weather. Does it affect us badly?
Yes, I think it does, but I mean, that's not a scientific statement, which I perhaps should be making as a university person. But from my own observations, it seems to me it's not necessarily cold and wet weather that causes the problem, although people do get very irritated and very depressed with that type of weather when they want to have their summer 2 weeks holiday. I think the big problem, as far as I can see it, with British people, being very careful there, is that we are built for variability of the weather. People are happy when there's a few days of sun, a few days of rain, a bit of fog, a good old mixture, the typical British weather. When we start getting day in, day out, all the same, you get up in the morning, it's still raining, the wind's still blowing, it begins to make people just that little bit irritated.
It would make me very pleased if we got up day after day and had some sunshine and warmth on our back, but there we are. Can I bring on the line now Graham Sharp, who's on the phone from London. Good morning, Mr. Sharp.
Good morning.
You're the Media Relations Manager for the William Hill organisation. Now, you've had a very strange bet recently about the weather as to whether it would rain continuously in London for the month, didn't you?
Yes, well, in fact, we've actually managed to establish a very lucrative sort of sideline within our organisation involving betting on the weather. Since we first introduced it a few years ago, when we thought we'd have a go at betting on a white Christmas, which seemed a very topical subject, we've been approached for all sorts of things, and during this particularly bad summer, I don't care what the statistics say, it's a terrible summer, we have often been asked to bet on the rain, and we finally thought that it was getting so bad that there might be a possibility that it would rain every single day throughout August. So we set some odds at the beginning of the month, and it has never happened before at all that it's rained in any single month.
But you must have thought that was a pretty safe bet.
Well, at the time we thought it was money for a rod, to be honest. We thought it was just a matter of putting up the odds and taking the money, because, as I say, it never happened before. But we got a severe fright until, strangely enough, we were rescued by August Bank Holiday Monday, which is usually the one day you can guarantee it will rain on.
How much money did you take on?
Well, we took a couple of £1,000 at various odds. I mean, we opened the book at 25 to 1, and by the time we closed it, it was down at the 2 to 1 level, which was extraordinary. And we stood to pay out something around about £30,000. But as I say, I think people were beginning to latch on to the bet as a form of insurance. They thought, well, if we're not going to see any sunshine, we might as well win some money if it does.
So how did you feel as the first week came and went, the second week came and went, and you're well into the third week and it's still raining every day?
Well, it all got a bit too much for me in the end. I had to take a few days off and go away on holiday. I can't handle this. They'll probably sack me if I come back and it's still raining. But we got a little bit windy, shall we say, as a meteorological expression.
Well, let me ask you, did you take any other silly offbeat bets to do with the weather?
Oh yes, well, I mean, as I say, at first they started off as being silly and offbeat, but they've developed into quite a lucrative sideline. I mean, there was the heady days of 1976 when we were actually able to bet on when it would start raining again. I mean, that was wonderful, and the year of the drought. But ever since then, it's virtually been a question of betting on when the rain's going to stop at any given time. We've taken bets on what the weather would be like on Royal Wedding Day when Charles and Diana got married. We consistently bet on the weather at Christmas, the fact of whether it will be a white Christmas, and on the temperatures and how cold it will get during the winter. You know, people like to bet on the weather because they consider it's the one thing that even the bookmakers can't have an influence on the outcome of.
Well, will you bear with us a second, Graham, because I want to turn to Dr. John Harrison, who's in our Stirling studio. John, is it possible that people could predict reasonably well in advance this sort of thing, whether it might rain for a month, something it apparently hasn't done before, or whether it might snow on Christmas Day?
Maybe you could assess the odds of, let's say, the next month being wet by looking at current weather patterns over the whole northern hemisphere. I don't think you could say anything more than it's slightly more probable than it was last year. I don't think you could you couldn't fix the odds that accurately.
But it is one thing, as Graham Sharp says, it's one thing that the bookmakers can't fix, isn't it?
That's right. As to a white Christmas, well, I'd say that's about evens at the moment.
Would you? Graham Sharp, what odds would you give for a white Christmas Day?
Bearing in mind the fact that we take as our centre London, because the London Weather Centre do all our adjudicating for us.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously totally professional and unbiased, and nobody can argue with their judgment. We're offering 12 to 1 at the moment, so statistically it's quite a good bet, because on average it happens once every 18 years, and it hasn't happened now for, I think, 14. So those odds are quite attractive.
Well, we might put a pound on that anyway. I think John Harris is saying it's better than evens, but there we are.
Yeah.
Graham, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay, Joseph Bryson is on the line from Hamilton. Good morning, Mr. Bryson.
Good morning.
Yes.
It's concerning weather forecasting.
Yeah.
Right. There's 4 seasons in the year: spring, summer, autumn and winter. Now, the wind at the turn of the quarter, we'll go back to March, 21st, 22nd of March. The wind that blows that day is the prevailing wind for the following 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's April, May and June. Now the wind on that day was south-west. Now for country people, the south-west means one thing: soft winds, rain.
Mr. Bryson, I'm sorry, it's a very bad line. Can we come back to you shortly? Okay. Douglas Ritchie is on the line now from Edinburgh. Good morning, Douglas Ritchie.
Good morning, David.
Yes, you're from Edinburgh Zoo.
That's correct, yes.
You've had a bit of a problem through there with the weather, have you not? Especially with the customers, huh?
Well, basically the problem has been, I don't think we've had a dry day in Edinburgh since about April. And we've had hundreds of thousands of people coming to the zoo and getting rained upon.
Yeah.
So we've decided to try and put a little sunshine back into their lives. And anyone who comes to the zoo during September and who experiences more than half an hour's rain during their visit will be able to claim what we're calling a wet weather ticket, which will give them half-price readmission to the zoo on what will hopefully be a sunny day.
Well, apart from the customers, what about the animals there? Have they been affected at all?
Oh yes, some have loved the rain. For example, the penguins love every minute of it. It's just like being back home in the Falklands. The more wet and miserable it is, the happier they are. But perhaps one of the more surprising aspects of the rain concerned our gorillas. We had a new gorilla arrive in the zoo in July, and he came in from Rotterdam Zoo. It was 27 stone, a big, muscular, magnificent beast, and it turned out he was terrified of rain. He'd never really experienced it before because his enclosure in Rotterdam was completely uncovered. So he stepped outdoors in Edinburgh, a raindrop hit him and he went scampering back inside again. It wouldn't come out until it stopped raining. So it's quite sort of sad in a way, this magnificent big beast terrified of a few raindrops.
Yeah, I mean, is the weather causing any extra problems for you there?
Yes, we do have quite a lot of serious problems with it. Our tropical birds don't like the wet weather, and quite a few of them have suffered. And many of our hoof-stock animals, things such as camels and antelopes, have suffered from what we technically call scouring, which is a polite term for the runs. What really happens is they eat grass, and if it's wet, they take in more moisture, and this gives them the runs. And this can be a serious problem and can even lead to death if we don't control it.
Douglas, we were talking earlier about humans being depressed by the weather, and we had a farmer on earlier talking about cows' output or its yield going down in this sort of weather. Do you think animals are actually depressed by those conditions?
Some can be, some aren't as active as they are normally in sunny weather. Things like the monkeys say, will spend more time indoors than outdoors. They're not quite as active, they don't seem to be quite as happy. They prefer to be out in the sunshine, moving about in the heat. But of course other animals, as I say, prefer it. The polar bears, for example, are more active this summer than they've ever been. Normally in the hot weather they're not particularly happy, they tend to spend most of their time dozing, but give them the rain and they love it.
Okay, Douglas Ritchie, thanks for joining us this morning. Helen Patterson is on the line from Thrusk near Stirling. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, Helen.
Well, I'm from farming stock as well, and live not all that far along the road from Mr. Moore. Now, just talking about the weather, my father talks about, normally we've had bad summers before, but usually somewhere along the line there's perhaps 2 weeks of good weather when everybody just gets on and everything gets finished, or nearly finished. But this year, I mean, let's be honest, we haven't had 2 consecutive sunny days. If we've had a good day, things are almost dry, and then the rain comes again. And fields here, one particular field, it was 3 weeks from when some was baled from it, and then it was 3 weeks again, and it's now just, it's not fit for anything.
Yeah, Michael Fish, I understand you've rejoined us in London.
Yes, I'm here again.
Michael, you've heard the problems of someone from a farm up in Stirling. This must be fairly worrying, the effect on the agricultural life.
Well, it is, obviously, yes. This is the point I made at the beginning of the programme, that although the statistics have shown that we haven't actually had a wet summer, what has been the problem is not the amount of rain, but the number of days that it's rained. And this has been certainly unusual, and of course that causes the farmers more problems than anything, because they can't get the hay dry, they can't get the grain harvested, and all this sort of thing.
Can I bring on the line William McLean from Glasgow, who has a question to put to you, Mike. Mr. McLean.
I've got a caravan up in White Hills near Bamshire, and I intend to go up there for a fortnight in September. What is my opportunities are the best if we think of getting any weather at all for it?
Did you get that, Mike?
I honestly wish I could help you. If I could see some fine weather that far ahead, I'd take some days off myself, but we just can't. The limit of our forecasting is really a few days, and at the very most about 5 days. After that it becomes impossible, or just guesswork, and we don't attempt it. But certainly for the coming week, it's not really going to be worth your while taking any time off. I don't see any decent weather this coming week, still on the cool side with further rain at times. Pretty windy weather too, actually, for the next 2 or 3 days, not the sort of weather to tow a caravan around.
Mr. McLean, is a holiday something you would consider if it was still raining like this, or would you not go at all? Well, hello, Mr. McLean.
It's a residential van we have, you see.
Yeah.
And it's we are pensioners. We've been waiting since June to go back up, you see, and this is just impossible now. Petrol and everything else, you just get others sitting in the car of gas, you see.
Yeah, what a shame. John Harrison, I mean, you're not in the prediction world, but can you see any improvement at all?
No. I same as Michael, I wouldn't wish to say any one way or the other for September, only that again, going back to statistics which have been shown to be extremely useful.
Puzzling at least, yes.
September might shape up towards the latter part, but I think it's typical of the summer that I took my holidays very early on.
Let me ask both of you, if I may, John Harrison, you first. Has any good at all come out of this prolonged rainy season we've had?
With no water shortage. And certain people, umbrella salesmen, and indoor recreation, people involved in indoor recreation have had quite a good summer.
Yeah.
There's, there are always good aspects, but I appreciate that the main body of people in the length and breadth of the country have had a really quite awful summer, quite depressing.
Yeah, I noticed that British Rail say that the number of umbrellas left in their trains, etc., has gone up by 25% in the last couple of months. Michael Fish, if it's been as bad as this during the summer, how on earth are we going to cope with the winter?
Well, I don't know. I was just thinking back to your British Rail, Mark. Why on earth, if it's been that wet, have people left their umbrellas behind? You'd have thought they'd have needed them, wouldn't you? Unfortunately, one thing we can say is that there's absolutely no connection. That might be good news, it might be bad news, but just because we've had a cool, wet summer, it doesn't follow that the winter's going to be either cold or wet. There's no sort of seasonal connection one to another. So once again, the winter, I'm afraid, is going to be potluck, fingers crossed.
Is there any way at all that, apart from scientifically, any way at all that you can predict what we're in for over the winter?
No way whatsoever. No, we've looked into it and we've realised that seasonal forecasting is next to impossible at the moment. And as I just said, there's no connection between one season to another. So just because we've had a bad summer, it doesn't necessarily follow we'll have a bad winter.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. My thanks this morning to Michael Fish for taking time out to join us in London, and thanks too to Dr. John Harrison for coming into our Stirling studio. My thanks also to everyone who took the trouble to call. I only hope the weather improves between now and next Saturday, when I'll be back with another phone-in. I hope you can join me then. My name's David Scott. Call me.
Studio production today was by Lynn Chambers. Research was by Joan Lawson. This is BBC Radio Scotland. It's 12 o'clock.